The royal banners have fallen, the gates still stand, but the empire they once guarded is gone. Persian soldiers now walk the streets of Babylon, while the throne of Nebuchadnezzar has become little more than a memory. The city remains magnificent, yet something far greater has vanished. One of the ancient world's most powerful empires has come to an end. Less than a century earlier, the Neo-Babylonian Empire had accomplished what few kingdoms ever could. It had shattered the mighty Assyrian Empire, expanded from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, and transformed Babylon into the most magnificent capital on earth. Behind its towering walls stood immense temples, glittering gateways, thriving markets, and a city that seemed destined to endure for generations. Yet appearances can be deceiving. How could an empire that rose with such astonishing speed and appeared so secure collapse in less than 100 years? Why did one of history's greatest capitals survive, while the empire that created it disappeared? The answer begins not with Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon's most famous king, but with a people who refused to accept conquest and an empire that believed its dominance would last forever. How does an empire rise from the ashes of another so powerful that it had ruled the ancient Near East through fear for centuries? And how does a kingdom that endured for less than 100 years leave behind a legacy so enduring that its capital became one of the most famous cities in human history? The Neo-Babylonian Empire was one of history's shortest-lived great empires, yet its story is one of extraordinary resilience, brilliant leadership, breathtaking ambition, and a reminder that the speed of an empire's rise is no guarantee of its survival. Its victories would reshape the ancient world. Its achievements would inspire generations. Its collapse would alter the course of history. But before Babylon became synonymous with wealth, power, and monumental splendor, it was a kingdom struggling simply to reclaim its freedom. By the 7th century BC, the Assyrian Empire stood as the unquestioned superpower of the ancient Near East. Stretching from Egypt to the mountains of modern Iran, it ruled millions through disciplined armies, an efficient provincial administration, and a reputation for crushing rebellion with relentless force. Few kingdoms dared challenge Assyria for long. Babylon, despite its immense religious importance and thousands of years of history, existed under Assyrian domination for much of this period. The city remained one of Mesopotamia's greatest spiritual and cultural centers, but politically it answered to kings ruling from Nineveh. The Babylonians never truly accepted that fate. Generation after generation, rulers attempted to restore their independence. Rebellions erupted with remarkable persistence. Some achieved brief success before Assyrian armies returned, others ended in catastrophe. Every failed uprising deepened the empire's determination to make Babylon an example for the rest of the Near East. The breaking point came in 689 BC. After suppressing yet another rebellion, the Assyrian king Sennacherib ordered Babylon destroyed. Temples were torn down, defensive walls were dismantled, palaces and public buildings were deliberately devastated, canals were damaged, monuments were defaced, and much of the city was left in ruins. It was more than military punishment. It was a calculated attempt to erase Babylon, not only as a political rival, but as a symbol of resistance itself. Yet Babylon refused to disappear. Even Assyria eventually recognized that some cities could not simply be erased. Later Assyrian kings reversed Sennacherib's policy, rebuilding Babylon's temples, restoring its canals, and allowing life to return. The city's immense religious prestige made permanent destruction politically impossible. Babylon remained under Assyrian authority, but beneath the restored streets and rebuilt temples, resentment never disappeared. Every generation remembered that Babylon had once ruled itself and believed it could do so again. Then the impossible began to happen. By the late 7th century BC, The seemingly invincible Assyrian Empire was beginning to fracture. Succession disputes weakened the royal court. Costly military campaigns strained resources. Rebellions flared across distant provinces, forcing Assyrian armies to fight on multiple fronts. The empire that had intimidated the ancient world for centuries was becoming dangerously overstretched. Few outside its borders could see it yet, but the balance of power was beginning to shift. One man recognized the opportunity. In 626 BC, a Babylonian noble named Nabopolassar launched a revolt against Assyrian rule, captured Babylon, and declared himself king. Unlike the rebellions that had come before, this one did not collapse under Assyria's response. Nabopolassar understood a hard truth that earlier leaders had failed to accept. Babylon alone could never defeat the greatest military empire of its age. If Assyria was to fall, it would require allies with the same goal. The most important of those allies were the Medes, an ambitious kingdom rising to the northeast. Together, the Babylonians and Medes forged an alliance that would transform the history of the ancient Near East. What had begun as a desperate struggle for independence was becoming something far more ambitious. Without fully realizing it, they were preparing to destroy one empire and build another in its place. Nabopolassar understood that defeating Assyria would require more than courage. It would demand patience, coordination, and the willingness to fight a long war against an empire that had dominated the Near East for centuries. Rather than gambling everything on a single decisive battle, the Babylonian-Median alliance steadily dismantled Assyria piece by piece. Strategic cities fell, supply lines were severed, Assyrian armies were forced to defend an ever-expanding front. The empire that had once inspired fear across the ancient world was now fighting simply to survive. Then came the moment that changed history. In 612 BC, after a brutal siege lasting several months, the allied armies stormed Nineveh, the magnificent Assyrian capital. One of the greatest imperial cities of the ancient world disappeared beneath fire, smoke, and destruction. Palaces that had celebrated centuries of conquest collapsed into rubble. Temples were devastated, royal archives were buried beneath the ruins. Although scattered Assyrian resistance survived for several more years, the empire itself would never recover. The balance of power in the ancient Near East had shifted forever. Babylon was no longer living in Assyria's shadow. For Nabopolassar, victory was only the beginning. Winning an empire was one challenge. Holding it together would prove another. He moved quickly to consolidate his gains, bringing former Assyrian territories throughout Mesopotamia under Babylonian control, while appointing governors to secure newly conquered provinces. Rather than dismantling the sophisticated administrative systems Assyria had built, Babylon adapted many of them, refining existing institutions instead of starting from scratch. That decision allowed the new empire to expand rapidly without sacrificing stability. Yet another rival was already watching. To the southwest, Egypt had no intention of allowing Babylon to replace Assyria as the dominant power of the Near East. Pharaoh Necho II marched north to support the last remaining Assyrian forces, hoping to preserve the old balance of power. The coming confrontation would decide far more than a single campaign. It would determine which kingdom would dominate the region for generations to come. That confrontation came in 605 BC at the Battle of Carchemish. Along the banks of the Euphrates River, Crown Prince Nebuchadnezzar led the Babylonian army against the combined Egyptian and Assyrian forces. The battle ended in a decisive Babylonian victory. Egypt's ambitions in Mesopotamia were shattered, while the last realistic hope of restoring the Assyrian Empire disappeared with them. From that moment forward, no rival could seriously challenge Babylon's claim to regional supremacy. Only weeks later, Nabopolassar died. The timing could hardly have been more significant. After helping destroy the greatest empire of his age, he left behind a kingdom transformed by victory, but still in the earliest stages of its own imperial journey. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, inherited not only vast new territories, but the enormous responsibility of preserving everything his father had fought to achieve. Nebuchadnezzar understood that conquest alone would never secure lasting greatness. Armies could win an empire, but they could not guarantee its future. Lasting power required prosperity, stability, and a vision that reached beyond the battlefield. Campaigns across Syria, Phoenicia, and Judah expanded Babylonian influence from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. Strategic trade routes, fertile agricultural lands, prosperous ports, and wealthy kingdoms now flowed into the empire's growing economy. Tributes strengthened the treasury, while Babylon's commanding position along the Euphrates transformed the city into the commercial crossroads of the ancient Near East. But Nebuchadnezzar wanted something even more enduring than military victories. He believed an empire needed a capital worthy of its ambitions, a city that would overwhelm visitors before a single word was spoken. Enormous resources poured into transforming Babylon into one of the most magnificent cities on earth. Massive defensive walls rose above the surrounding plain. Temples were restored and expanded on an unprecedented scale. Canals improved transportation, agriculture, and commerce. Monumental gateways proclaimed the confidence of a civilization that believed a new golden age had arrived. The Neo-Babylonian Empire had risen with astonishing speed. In barely a generation, it had overthrown the greatest military power of its age, defeated Egypt's challenge for regional dominance, and emerged as the unquestioned power of the ancient Near East. Yet its greatest achievements were still to come. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon itself would become the empire's most extraordinary masterpiece. By the middle of the 6th century BC, the Neo-Babylonian Empire had reached the height of its power. In less than a century, it had accomplished what few civilizations in history ever achieved. It had overthrown the dominant superpower of its age, secured control of the Fertile Crescent, and transformed itself into the political, military, economic, and cultural center of the ancient Near East. From the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, kings acknowledged Babylonian supremacy. Trade flourished, cities prospered, wealth poured into the imperial treasury. For a brief moment in history, Babylon appeared not merely powerful, but unstoppable. At the center of that remarkable transformation stood Nebuchadnezzar II. Unlike rulers remembered only for conquest, Nebuchadnezzar mastered both war and statecraft. He strengthened frontier defenses, secured vital trade routes, and maintained firm control over distant provinces while investing enormous resources into the prosperity of the empire itself. His reign lasted more than 40 years, giving Babylon something every great civilization depends upon, but few enjoy for long: continuity. Military security, political stability, and economic confidence reinforced one another, allowing the empire to flourish without the constant turmoil that had weakened so many rivals. Prosperity reached far beyond the battlefield. The empire's wealth came not only from tribute, but from one of the most productive agricultural regions in the ancient world. An extensive network of canals carried water across southern Mesopotamia, transforming fertile plains into an agricultural powerhouse. Grain, dates, livestock, and textiles supplied growing cities, while merchants carried copper, timber, precious stones, incense, wine, and luxury goods across thousands of miles. Positioned astride the Euphrates, Babylon became the commercial crossroads between East and West, collecting wealth from trade as effectively as it had from conquest. That prosperity funded an ambitious vision unlike anything seen since the great civilizations of early Mesopotamia. Nebuchadnezzar was determined to build a capital that reflected the empire's new status. Babylon would not simply govern the Near East, it would impress everyone who entered it. Every ambassador, merchant, and foreign ruler would leave carrying the same message. This was the greatest city on earth. The transformation was extraordinary. Massive double walls surrounded the city. The brilliant blue Ishtar Gate, welcomed visitors beneath rows of glazed lions, dragons, and bulls that proclaimed both divine protection and royal authority. The broad processional way guided religious festivals through the heart of the capital toward the great temple of Marduk, where political power and religious legitimacy reinforced one another before thousands of spectators. Towering above the skyline stood Etemenanke, the immense stepped ziggurat later associated with the biblical Tower of Babel. Whether later traditions exaggerated its height remains uncertain, but its symbolism was unmistakable. Babylon presented itself as the center of the civilized world, where heaven, kingship, and empire appeared united in a single monumental landscape. Its reputation spread far beyond its borders. Greek travelers marveled at its immense walls. Hebrew scripture preserved the memory of both its power and its conquest of Jerusalem. Later generations told stories of the legendary Hanging Gardens, eventually counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Historians continue to debate whether the gardens truly stood in Babylon or elsewhere, but the debate itself reveals something important. The city's grandeur became so legendary that even centuries later, people struggled to separate history from myth. Yet Babylon's greatness rested on far more than magnificent buildings. Behind the monuments stood an exceptionally organized empire. Provincial governors collected taxes, supervised local administration, and ensured tribute reached the capital. Royal roads connected major population centers, while river transport allowed merchants, officials, and armies to travel efficiently across the empire. Scribes filled thousands of clay tablets with contracts, legal judgments, commercial records, diplomatic correspondence, and astronomical observations, preserving knowledge accumulated over centuries. Among Babylon's greatest achievements was its scholarship. Night after night, Babylonian astronomers carefully observed the heavens, recording planetary movements, eclipses, and celestial cycles with astonishing precision. These records would influence Greek science, later Islamic scholars, and eventually help shape the foundations of modern astronomy. Long after Babylon's armies had vanished, its knowledge continued traveling across civilizations. Perhaps the empire's greatest strength, however, was something less tangible: confidence. Assyria had ruled largely through fear. Babylon increasingly ruled through prestige. Military victories demanded respect, but its architecture, commerce, scholarship, engineering, and cultural influence inspired admiration even among competing kingdoms. Babylon had become the civilization others measured themselves against. History, however, has a habit of hiding danger behind success. Empires rarely collapse when they appear weak. More often, the first signs of decline emerge, while prosperity still masks deeper problems. Behind Babylon's magnificent walls, beneath its extraordinary wealth, and beyond the confidence of its rulers, subtle weaknesses were already beginning to grow. Few could see them. Fewer still believed they mattered, but they would soon change the course of the empire forever. The first signs of decline were easy to miss. By every outward measure, the Neo-Babylonian Empire still appeared to be at the height of its power. Babylon remained the richest city in the Near East. Trade continued to flourish. Its towering walls inspired awe. Its temples dominated the skyline, and few would have predicted that the empire had entered the final chapter of its history. Then, in 562 BC, everything changed. After more than 4 decades on the throne, Nebuchadnezzar II died. Few rulers had left behind a stronger empire or a more magnificent capital. Yet his greatest achievement also concealed his greatest legacy's greatest vulnerability. So much of Babylon's stability rested upon the authority, experience, and prestige of one remarkable ruler. The question was no longer whether Babylon was powerful. It was whether anyone could preserve what Nebuchadnezzar had built. The answer came with alarming speed. Within only a few years, Babylon passed through a succession of short-lived kings. Some ruled for only months, before being overthrown or murdered. Court intrigue replaced political stability. Powerful officials competed for influence, while confidence in the monarchy steadily weakened. Institutions that had seemed unshakable under Nebuchadnezzar suddenly revealed how much they had depended upon his personal leadership. The empire remained wealthy, but wealth and stability are not the same thing. The final ruler, Nabonidus, inherited an empire that still possessed enormous resources, but was becoming increasingly divided from within. His reign introduced another source of uncertainty. Rather than emphasizing Babylon's traditional devotion to Marduk, he elevated the moon god Sin, creating growing tension with the influential priesthood. In Babylon, religion was inseparable from government. Challenging long-established religious traditions meant risking the support of the very institutions that helped legitimize royal authority. Then came a decision that historians continue to debate. Nabonidus left Babylon for nearly a decade, spending much of his reign in the Arabian oasis of Taima, while his son Belshazzar governed in his absence. Scholars still debate whether his departure was driven by religious devotion, political calculation, strategic concerns, or a combination of all three. Whatever the reason, the consequences became increasingly difficult to ignore. A king who was rarely seen gradually became a king whose authority was increasingly questioned. Across the empire, uncertainty spread quietly. Provincial governors exercised greater independence. Merchants adapted to changing political realities. Priests questioned the king's priorities. Ordinary citizens increasingly looked to Belshazzar rather than Nabonidus for leadership. None of these developments alone threatened the empire. Together, however, they slowly weakened the confidence that had held Babylon together for decades. While Babylon wrestled with internal uncertainty, a new power was reshaping the ancient world. To the east, Cyrus II had united the Persians into one of history's most disciplined and ambitious kingdoms. One after another, neighboring powers fell before him. Yet Cyrus conquered with more than military brilliance. He often portrayed himself as a liberator rather than a destroyer, respecting local traditions, restoring religious institutions, and winning the support of populations that had grown dissatisfied with their rulers. Every victory expanded Persian territory, while steadily bringing Cyrus closer to Babylon's frontiers. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. One empire was looking inward, distracted by succession, political division, and questions of legitimacy. The other was moving relentlessly outward under confident and decisive leadership. Yet appearances still favored Babylon. Its treasury remained full. Its defenses were among the strongest ever built. Its capital continued to astonish visitors from across the known world. To many observers, the Neo-Babylonian Empire looked every bit as powerful as it had under Nebuchadnezzar. But history often disguises its turning points. The same empire that had recognized Assyria's moment of weakness decades earlier was now unknowingly creating its own. Beyond Babylon's towering walls, another ambitious ruler was watching, waiting and preparing to do exactly what Babylon itself had once done to Assyria. The confrontation that followed would decide far more than the fate of a single empire. It would determine who would shape the future of the ancient Near East for centuries to come. In 539 BC, the Neo-Babylonian Empire faced the greatest challenge in its brief but extraordinary history. To the east stood Cyrus the Great, ruler of the rapidly expanding Persian Empire. In only a few decades, he had defeated the Medes, conquered Lydia, and forged the largest empire the region had ever known. Each victory had strengthened Persia's military, enriched its resources, and expanded its influence. Now only one great power remained beyond Cyrus's control: Babylon. For Cyrus, this was more than another conquest. It was the final step in replacing Babylon as the dominant power of the ancient Near East. The campaign unfolded with remarkable speed. Babylonian forces marched north to confront the Persian advance at the Battle of Opis on the Tigris River. There, Cyrus's disciplined army delivered a decisive defeat that shattered Babylon's ability to defend its northern frontier. It was more than a battlefield loss. It exposed how much the empire's military strength had already been weakened by years of political instability and declining unity. For the first time in decades, Babylon's enemies could see that the empire was vulnerable. The consequences came quickly. Soon afterward, the strategically important city of Sippar surrendered without significant resistance. One of Babylon's principal defensive positions had fallen almost without a fight. The road to the imperial capital now lay open, yet many Babylonians still believed the city itself could never be captured. Its massive fortifications ranked among the greatest ever constructed. Thick defensive walls surrounded the city for miles. The Euphrates River flowed through its center, providing both water and an additional line of defense. Vast storehouses held enough grain and supplies to survive a prolonged siege. To generations of Babylonians, the city seemed almost invincible. But the greatest weakness no longer stood outside the walls. It existed within the empire itself. Years of disputed succession had weakened confidence in the monarchy. Tensions between Nabonidus and Babylon's influential priesthood had eroded political unity. Provincial loyalty had become increasingly uncertain, while Persia's uninterrupted string of victories convinced many that history's momentum had shifted. Babylon still possessed magnificent defenses, but its greatest advantage had always been the confidence of the people who defended them. That confidence was beginning to disappear. Exactly how Babylon fell remains one of antiquity's enduring mysteries. Later Greek historians described Persian engineers diverting part of the Euphrates River, allowing soldiers to enter beneath the city's defenses while celebrations distracted its inhabitants. Babylonian records tell a far quieter story, suggesting that after Cyrus's earlier victories, the city was occupied with relatively little resistance. Historians continue to debate which account more closely reflects what actually happened, and the complete truth may never be known. The outcome, however, is beyond dispute. On October 12, 539 BC, Babylon passed into Persian hands. For a city that had seemed unconquerable, the transition was astonishingly swift. The empire that had overthrown mighty Assyria less than a century earlier disappeared in a matter of weeks. Yet Cyrus understood something many conquerors before him had not. Destroying Babylon would have been easy. Using it would be far more valuable. Rather than reducing the city to ruins, Cyrus chose preservation over destruction. He recognized Babylon's immense economic, religious, and administrative importance. Temples continued functioning. Priests retained their positions. Local customs were respected. Cyrus even presented himself as the legitimate ruler chosen by Marduk to restore proper order. His policy of allowing displaced peoples, including many Jewish exiles, to return to their homelands earned him a reputation strikingly different from that of earlier imperial conquerors. Babylon survived. The Neo-Babylonian Empire did not. The territories that had once answered to Babylon now served Persian kings. Decisions about war, diplomacy, taxation, and imperial strategy were no longer made inside Nebuchadnezzar's magnificent capital, but across a vastly larger empire stretching from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. Babylon remained one of Persia's richest and most important cities, yet it was no longer the heart of imperial power. Its decline afterward unfolded slowly rather than suddenly. Nearly 2 centuries later, Alexander the Great entered Babylon in triumph after defeating Persia. Captivated by its history and grandeur, he envisioned restoring the city as the capital of his own empire. But his unexpected death there in 323 BC ended those ambitions before they could be realized. As new kingdoms established different capitals and trade routes gradually shifted elsewhere, Babylon slowly lost population, wealth, and influence. Canals filled with silt, temples fell into disrepair. Great avenues grew quiet, neighborhoods were abandoned. The city that had once stood at the center of the ancient world slowly surrendered to time. The Neo-Babylonian Empire ultimately fell for reasons far greater than a single battle or a single king. It rose through visionary leadership, unity, and the ability to seize a historic opportunity. It declined when political instability weakened succession, internal divisions eroded confidence, and a younger, more adaptable rival recognized the moment to strike. The empire that had risen by exploiting Assyria's weaknesses failed to recognize that history's cycle had quietly turned against itself. Although the Neo-Babylonian Empire existed for less than a century, its influence reached far beyond its remarkably brief lifespan. Most empires are remembered only in the lands they once ruled. Babylon became something far greater. It became an idea, a symbol of power, wealth, ambition, and human achievement that endured long after its kings and armies had disappeared. Its capital became one of history's most recognizable cities. Babylon lived on in the Hebrew Bible, Greek histories, Roman writings, archaeology, and countless later works of literature and art. Across centuries, its name became inseparable from stories of greatness, conquest, exile, prophecy, and legend. Few ancient cities have remained so deeply embedded in the world's cultural memory. Yet Babylon's greatest legacy extended well beyond its reputation. The Neo-Babylonian Empire preserved and advanced thousands of years of Mesopotamian knowledge inherited from earlier civilizations. Babylonian scholars refined astronomical observations with extraordinary precision, recording planetary movements, eclipses, and celestial cycles that later influenced Greek science, Islamic scholarship, and eventually the foundations of modern astronomy. Scribes continued sophisticated traditions of mathematics, law, administration, and record-keeping that would shape the governments and empires that followed, including the Persians, who wisely preserved many Babylonian institutions rather than replacing them. Its rulers also demonstrated that enduring greatness required more than military conquest. They inherited the ruins of Assyria, but built something different: monumental architecture, engineering, commerce, scholarship, and culture became instruments of imperial strength alongside armies and fortifications. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon became not simply the political capital of an empire, but the cultural heart of the ancient Near East. Its story, however, carries an equally enduring lesson. The empire reached extraordinary heights under a leader whose vision united military success, political stability, and economic prosperity. Yet after his death, institutions that had seemed permanent proved far more fragile than anyone had imagined. Strong walls could not compensate for weakened leadership. Great wealth could not guarantee unity. A glorious past could not protect an empire that failed to adapt, while a younger and more dynamic rival seized the initiative. That lesson has echoed throughout history. Again and again, great powers have risen by solving extraordinary challenges, only to discover that success can create new vulnerabilities. Confidence becomes complacency, stability becomes rigidity, strength slowly gives way to assumptions that tomorrow will look like today. Babylon was not the first civilization to experience that cycle, but it became one of history's clearest examples. Today, the ruins of Babylon still rise above the plains of modern Iraq. Weathered foundations, broken walls, and scattered bricks are all that remain of a city that once astonished the ancient world. Visitors can still walk where kings, merchants, priests, and diplomats once passed beneath the Ishtar Gate and along the processional way. The empire is gone, but its story continues to speak across more than 2.5 millennia. The Neo-Babylonian Empire conquered a superpower, created one of the ancient world's most magnificent capitals, and preserved knowledge that helped shape civilizations long after its own had disappeared. Its rulers believed they were building something eternal. History proved otherwise. Because the greatest illusion any empire can possess is not believing it can conquer the world. It is believing that its moment will never end.